We are privileged to have with us Brother Billy Tan and Acharya Upul Gamage as our speakers for today under the K3 DHAMMANANDA Lecture Series 2015.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. Good evening, Brother Upul. First, I would like to thank Brother Upul for inviting me to join him in tonight's forum. When I first received his request, I was very happy. My emotions got the better of me. It made me feel happy. But it is also a very important point of what Brother Upul mentioned. Emotions remind us of our humanity. It reminds us we are human. So that moment of excitement is part of this emotional process that reminds me, hey, I'm here. I'm alive, I can feel. Having said that, I think the next thing to realize is that, again, what Brother Upul has mentioned, emotions are visitors. They come. Well, if they can come, they can go. Emotions are fighters. When they come, when you try to resist them, oh, they love it. They fight back with you. What you resist persists. So today's sharing from my part is to show you some of the scientific findings and psychological explanations about emotions. First, we will talk about mind. The Buddha spoke about the mind with 3 words to describe this thing called mind. Because the word mind is quite a complicated word to explain. If you ask different people, even different scientists, different psychologists, different brain scientists, what is mind? Chances are you can get quite a different set of response from different people. But the Buddha was wise. He had described it with 3 words, and these are 3 parts of mental experience we collectively call mind. One important thing that I have learned from studying under Venerable Dr. Punaji is that when we look at the Buddha's teachings and read the sutras, when we see the word mind, it's very important to try to figure out which of these 3 words that Buddha was using when he referred to mind. Because each of these 3 words has a different meaning, has a different kind of characteristics and activity that's going on, different kind of experience. So what are these 3 words? The first word the Buddha used is vijnana. Vijnana basically arises with the 5 aggregates. Whenever our sense organs are being stimulated by activities in the environment, then it arises. Many people translate the word vijnana as consciousness. And that's a good word. But then again, if you were to ask different scientists, what is the meaning of the word consciousness? Every different scientist is likely to give you a different answer. So Venerable Dr. Punaji has taught me that a more precise translation is the word perception. That's what it is. That we have perceived something through our sense organs, and that is vijnana. So vijnana arises as the process of perception as a result of the sense organs being stimulated by activities in the environment. The eye being stimulated by light, the ear stimulated by sound waves, and so on. So that is the first part. The second word that the Buddha used to describe what we call mind is the word mano. There is a very precise scientific term to describe mano, and that is cognitive process. the process of cognition. This is basically the process that gives rise to our ability to think, or the ability to have this thing called intellect, to be intelligent, to be able to take control of our thoughts. That's where mano is. Mano is the part of the mind that allows us to be able to take control of what goes on, to observe, to decide to observe, to choose our thoughts. All these are within the activity of the mano. And the mano is also the part of the activity that tries to interpret whatever we have perceived through our sense organs. So trying to interpret what the vijnana has produced. With this perception, mano will try to interpret and give meaning to it. And this process of interpretation is called papancha. Some people translate that as mental proliferation, but it's actually not a very good translation. Papancha is basically an interpretation of what we have perceived. And this interpretation very much depends on our memory. The third word the Buddha used, which many people call it emotions. Well, emotion, as Brother Upul mentioned, there is no one Pali word to describe emotion. The word Cheetah that the Buddha used is not actually talking about emotion itself. It is talking about an activity of the mind, which, again, there is a very precise psychological term. It's called affective process, as opposed to cognitive process. This affective process of mind is the part of the mind that affects the body and affects the stability of the mind as a whole. So what it does is that it reacts to feelings, sensations, whatever the sense organs feel from the environment. So when it is stimulated by sensations that are pleasant, it reacts in a certain way. When stimulated by sensations that are unpleasant and painful, it reacts in another way. When stimulated by sensations that are neutral, again, it reacts in a different way. So it reacts according to this feeling. And this feeling is Vedana, the feeling from our sense organs. So these are the three words that the Buddha used to describe this thing we collectively call the mind. So when we read sutras and it talks about mind, I think it's very useful, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, it's very useful to investigate what is the Pali word that the Buddha was using. So was he talking about the emotional part of the mind, or was he talking about the intellectual part of the mind? So was he referring to the process called mano, or was he referring to the process called chitta? Because they have slightly different meaning, different experiences, different reactions. So let's take a look at how we experience the environment and how this thing called emotion comes about. When activities in the environment stimulate our sense organs, because we have ears, we have eyes, we have nose, we have tongue, and we have the body. So all these various sense organs are able to receive stimulations from the environment. And when our sense organs are stimulated, there is a process that is continuously, perpetually going on, non-stop. And that is the process of Panchakanda, the five aggregates. With that, it gives rise to vijnana, perception. We have now perceived something from the environment. And this gives us the ability to see something, to hear something, to smell something, to taste something, or to touch something. So these are what we experience from the environment. At the same time, with this experience, the cognitive process of mind arises, mano, arises to try to interpret what has been seen, heard, smelt, tasted, and touched, and try to give meaning to it. And in this process, at the same time, there is a feeling associated with each stimulation of our sense organ. And this feeling can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is the feeling which is called Vedana. This is not really an emotional feeling. This is a sensational feeling, a sensory feeling. We sense something that is pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So this sensational feeling arouses the part of the mind called Cheetah. Cheetah is the affective process. With the arising of Cheetah, that Cheetah activity actually creates a lot of activity going on inside the brain. And it triggers a biochemical reaction. So there is a biochemical reaction going on in the brain as a result of that. And this biochemical reaction basically causes the release of hormones, enzymes, and various chemicals in the body. And these chemicals and hormones and enzymes, they get flooded through the body, through our blood circulation system. They get carried to different parts of the body. Different hormones are released and they are carried to different parts of the body. When they reach different parts of the body, various organs in the body begin to react differently. So when we get emotionally excited, two of the very powerful hormones that are released are called cortisol and adrenaline. When they are circulated through the body and brought to different parts of the body, they cause different organs in the body to react in very specific ways. For instance, it causes your heart to beat faster. It causes your respiration system to hasten, to deepen. You begin to breathe deeper. It causes your body temperature to rise. It causes your blood pressure to increase. It even causes the release of blood sugar to convert stored energy into active energy. Why does it do that? All these are the result of evolution. We have evolved over millions of years, and the result of evolution led our body to behave in this manner. This reaction is a physiological reaction. The original purpose of this reaction is to protect the organism from harm. When we see something that is coming towards us very quickly, fast approaching object, it could be a threat, because this fast approaching object, going back to ancient times, it could be a saber-toothed tiger running towards you. When we hear loud sounds, it is also a threat, because this loud sound reminds us of the roar of the saber-toothed tiger that is coming out of the bush. So we have evolved this way to react to these environmental stimulations. Loud noises, bright light, fast approaching object, hot temperature when we touch them, or very cold temperature when we touch them. All these pose as threats to the body. And these threatening conditions cause the release of hormones to help the organism to cope with it, to help the organism to fight against the threat or to run away from the threat. This fighting and running is called the fight or flight reaction. And scientists have basically collectively called it stress. So this is a physical form of stress. It causes tension in the body. The body is uncomfortable. And this discomfort in the body can be very severe. So it causes this feeling of discomfort called dukkha. Now the word dukkha is used variously in different aspects to mean different things. Generically, the word dukkha could mean suffering as a whole. But in this particular instance, the word dukkha is basically referred to physical pain. So what you've just seen in the diagram there is that physical pain in the body, the physical discomfort, the physical stress. So this is really called stress. So here I use the word stress to refer to the physical part of suffering. Emotions come in two dimensions. The first one I have just described to you is this physiological dimension, the physical part, the bodily physical reaction. But there is a second dimension in emotion, and that is the psychological aspect, the mental aspect of emotion. So when this body changes, when this body reacts and feels uncomfortable, that is a disturbance to the mind. This bodily change is physiological disturbance, and this disturbance affects the mind. And all this is the result of the activity of Cheetah. Now, emotions also have two kinds of activities: arousal and reaction. So what you have just seen is the physiological arousal from our sense organs. When we see something, hear something, smell something, touch something, taste something, there is a physical arousal, and it causes the physiological disturbance. This physiological disturbance, again, is another form of arousal. It arouses the mental part of the mind. So it affects the mental part of the mind. That's why it's called the affective process. So Cheetah is basically referred to as the affective process from a psychological perspective. So when that is happening, it causes the arousal of mental experiences. So the Cheetah is aroused. With the arousal of the Cheetah, memory arises, imagination arises, expectation arises. So when these things arise, they begin to remind us of what was pleasant in the past. Whatever feeling that was pleasant, we can enjoy it more. We can indulge in it. We want more of that, what is pleasant. And if it is something that is unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. We hate it. We want to avoid it. And if it is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, it actually leads to the delusion that there is a self that is being affected. This body is the self. That delusion that the body is the self. So these three states are the lobha, the dosa, and the moha. When we feel pleasant sensations, our memory and imagination reminds us, oh, we want more of that pleasant sensation. When we feel something that is unpleasant or painful, it reminds us, oh, we want to get rid of it, we hate it, and so on. So that actually disturbs our rational thinking. When Cheetah is aroused, with the arising of imagination, memory, expectation, they begin to disturb rational thinking, disturbing the mano part of the mind, disturbing this mano experience, the ability to think rationally, the cognitive process. So when that is being disturbed, there is a tug-of-war going on in the mind. That tug-of-war is a tug-of-war between this emotional feeling arising because of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral sensations, and our rational thinking that tells us we shouldn't be reacting in this way. For example, when we taste something very tasty, a very tasty food, and it makes us feel good, our emotion will say, oh, we like to eat more of this. But at the same time, The mano reminds us, hey, this may not be healthy for you. One classic example is the fruit many of us know. It's called durian. Durian tastes so good. So many people love to eat durian. There are very few people in Malaysia who doesn't like to eat durian because it tastes so good. But if I were to ask you, give me one good reason why durian is good for you. Very difficult. Difficult to explain why durian is good for you. Because it just tastes so good. So, tasting good and wanting more of it, that is the Cheetah part of the activity. But realizing that it may not be healthy for you, that is the mano part. So these two are constantly in conflict. We know what might be good for us, and yet we want to indulge in enjoying what is more pleasurable. Or we want to indulge in hating or getting rid of what is unpleasant. So this is a constant battle going on. And this part of the experience is called domanassa, distress. This experience of distress. So this is the mental suffering as a result of that. This mental suffering is domanassa. So the physical suffering is dukkha, and the mental suffering is domanassa. And this is a constant battle between our feeling, emotional feeling, and our reasoning, rational thinking. So mano and chitta are constantly having a tug of war going on in the mind. The whole purpose of meditation is really to bring these two activities to be at peace with each other so that they become unified, they become composed. But if we don't learn to meditate, even when we know how to meditate, but in our normal daily life, we are constantly experiencing this tug of war going on, this conflict going on. It is happening every moment, moment to moment. So let's take a look at what the scientists have to say about it. Now, I just want to have one quick question for you to think about. When you are torn between an emotional thought of wanting something pleasurable and a rational thought of saying that it might not be good for you, most of the time, which thought wins? The emotional thought wins, or the reasoning or the rational thought wins? 9 out of 10 times, it is the emotion that wins. Why is that? Well, the bad news is that emotion wins almost every time. In a way, the good news is it's not your fault. The scientists have found out why. What is going on inside the brain that makes emotions so demanding, so dominating, so controlling. So let's take a look at what the scientists have to say about what's going on inside the brain. Now, I just want to mention one important word which you will hear in this presentation, in the video. The word is called amygdala. The word amygdala refers to a part of the brain when it is aroused. That is the part of the brain that triggers all these emotional reactions. So in other words, you could basically say the amygdala is the emotional control center of your brain. So when the amygdala is aroused, it causes a lot of emotional reactions going on, biochemical reactions, as well as mental distress going on.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off.
It's the
tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is, if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has super highways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
The natural order of things is that our brain is evolved to do fancy things cognitively. What do I mean by fancy things cognitively? Look around you, all the technology that is around you, your phone, the camera, the aircon, the fan. All these are inventions of the human mind. That's what the brain was evolved to do, to create new gadgets, to create new things and so on, but not necessarily to control the emotion. And you have heard what the scientists pointed out. There are very strong connections going from the emotional part of the brain called the amygdala, going to the front part of the brain, the thinking part of our brain. See, the front part of our brain is our thinking part of our brain. Basically, the activity in this front part of the brain is what we call mano, the intellectual process. So, the emotional part of the brain has very strong connections going to the front part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain. The thinking part of the brain has very weak connections going back to the emotional part of the brain. So when emotion is aroused, when we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something that seems pleasurable or painful or whatever, it arouses the emotion. The emotional part of the brain sends a lot of signals, sabotaging signals to the thinking part of the brain. And all these are like negative messages, disturbing your thinking. So your judgment is shut down when your emotions is aroused. And this is why, without training, under normal circumstances, every person is more likely to submit to the demands of emotional thoughts than to wake up to the proper things that's going on with rational thoughts. So we react towards emotional thoughts more. Without training, then these emotional thoughts are constantly choosing us. So in other words, if we don't train our mind, we are allowing emotional thoughts to choose us. We like something, we get excited, we get aroused, we want more of it. Or we don't like something, we hate it, we want to fight it, we want to kill it, we want to get rid of it. All these are emotional thoughts. They're constantly choosing us. Without training, thoughts choose us. And that's where meditation comes in. Meditation helps us to train our mind so that we are able to choose thoughts. We choose not to think, not to allow emotional thoughts to disturb us. We choose to observe instead of imagine, instead of expecting, instead of recalling the past. So instead of submitting to the arising of memory, instead of submitting to the arising of imagination, and instead of submitting to the arising of expectations, we can choose to just remain silent and observe. And when the body is disturbed by these arousals from the environment, and all these hormones are flooding the body, causing us to get excited, we can choose to relax. Because if we don't choose to relax, what happens? The excitement, the bodily conditions will continue to disturb us. And they will trigger more and more arousal, more and more emotional thoughts. The Buddha pointed out very clearly. He said, emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Again here, the word distress is this mental suffering. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. Every one of us, we are under the spell of emotion. But it's very important to remember, emotions are not us. Emotions are visitors. If they can come, they can go. But the problem with emotions are very powerful. They're very strong. They are great fighters. They never lose. When emotion gets into a fight, emotion wins. So how do you beat emotion? Well, small little secret. Don't fight with emotion. That's it. Right? Let it be. Allow it to go away. Peacefully. Because the moment you try to resist emotion, emotion persists. And all the famous psychologists, in fact, I think this was stated by a well-known psychologist, Carl Jung, what you resist persists. So don't fight it. Allow it to go away. How do you allow it to go away? Learn to relax. That's all there is. When you get excited, just pause. Don't do anything. Don't react. Just take a deep breath and just relax. And your emotional states will subside. So I'm going to show you the scientific explanation how this emotion can be allowed to subside and go away. If we don't do that, then we are just like animals. I'm showing you here an ancient Sanskrit shloka that was used for thousands of years throughout India to teach children not to behave like animals. The English translation is there. It says, taking food, sleeping, avoiding dangers, sexual activities, these are acts common between animals and humans. Ability to think is what makes humans different. Without thinking, humans are just like animals. So in other words, use the power of your intellect, use the power of your ability to think rationally. That is how you can help tame your emotion. And there's also one thing that is used commonly. People talk about controlling emotion. Now, don't try to control in that sense, right? Controlling, when you try to control emotions, emotions controls you. Emotion is a fighter that has never lost any battle. Remember that. Every battle that emotion gets into, emotion has won. The only time the emotion loses is nobody fights with him. Imagine this great big fighter, very strong and powerful fighter. He steps into the fighting ring. And he is so strong and powerful, nobody can beat him. Every time somebody steps into this fighting ring, boxing ring, they get punched down and get knocked down. And this big fighter, this emotion, wins every match. What happens if this fighter steps into the fighting ring and then nobody steps in? He's alone there. What happens? After a while, he gets bored. He leaves. He doesn't want to stand in the fighting ring all by himself, doing nothing. He wants to fight. So he will leave that fighting ring and go look for some other fighting ring where he can fight. And that's how emotions work. When emotions arise, don't fight with it. Let it leave. Allow it to leave. Right? So basically, this is very important. Think. Realize that you can choose your thoughts, and when you are being affected by emotion, choose relaxation. Choose to relax. Choose not to fight, not to start this battle going on. That ability to choose is our thinking mind. Ability to think is what makes humans different from animals. And this ability to think, this activity of the mind, that is the mano part of the mind. And that is why human beings are called manusya. The word manusya, whether in Sanskrit, manusa, or in Pali, manusya, or in Bahasa Malaysia, manusia, they come from that root word mano, the ability to think. That is what makes humans different from animals. Exercise your ability to think. Be conscious. Be mindful. Don't be unconscious. Don't be unmindful. Don't be delusional. And just let things take control. Be aware of things. Observe things. That's how you can exercise your thinking mind. So going back to this chart, when we become stressed with all this hormonal activity going on, and we feel physical discomfort, and they disturb the mind, and then we begin to feel mental suffering, domanassa, what can we do? We can use the power of our intellect, the power of our mano, our thinking mind, to choose our thoughts. What kind of thoughts? When you get excited emotionally, right, use the power of your conscious, rational thinking to choose to relax. Conscious relaxation. The first thing is do nothing. It's so easy. Relaxation is the easiest thing in the world to do. A lot of people talk about controlling emotion, trying to find ways and means to stop emotion. You can't stop it. It is such a great fighter. You have no chance fighting him. The only way you can stop him, so to speak, is to allow him to leave. And that is by relaxing. Consciously relax. But that's not enough. That's just for a moment. You need to do more than that. You need to bring your attention inwards. Bringing this attention inwards is called introspective attention. And that's where meditation comes in. It trains you to bring this attention inwards, to pay attention to what is going on, to observe, to choose what you are observing, not to allow emotional thoughts take control of you. Choose your thoughts, not allow your thoughts to choose you. And when you're able to do that, you will now be able to cultivate the mind one step further, and that is to cultivate mental equilibrium and tranquility of mind. And this mental equilibrium and tranquility of mind leads you to a state of mind that is peaceful, serene, right, composed, unified. So the mano and the cheetah are no longer fighting. That's how you can help yourself, by learning to meditate, learning conscious relaxation, learning introspective attention, and learning to cultivate mental equilibrium and tranquility of mind. Conscious relaxation, what do we do? Well, first thing is do nothing. That's what it is. Just stop. Pause. Don't react. When something arouses you, makes you angry, makes you fearful, makes you feel shameful, makes you feel unhappy, makes you feel frustrated, worried, anxious, whatever the emotional state, don't react. Pause. Take a deep breath. Relax. When you do that, these biochemical reactions in your body begin to subside. That means the physiological disturbance begins to relax itself. When you relax your body, you are relaxing the physiological disturbances. So the biochemical activities in the body begin to calm down, begin to subside. With that, the tension in the body eases. Now your body becomes more and more comfortable. Right? It's no longer subject to all this tension. And when that happens, the mind is no longer disturbed by tension in the body. And this is a very important junction, a very important crossroad, because a relaxed body is an absolute necessary condition for a calm mind. If your body is not relaxed, your mind can never be calm. As long as your body is excited, there's hormones being released. The more you react to these hormonal releases, they release more hormones. That is the nature of the way our body has evolved. And therefore, by relaxing, you are creating the condition to calm your mind. Relaxation is a necessary condition for calming the mind. This is why the first thing you do when you learn meditation is to learn to relax. And then what happens next? That is calming the mind. Introspective attention. That relaxed body suggests that there are no threats. So there will be no more fresh hormones being released. And then you begin to pay conscious, focused attention inwards. Conscious, focused, introspective attention. In doing so, you are choosing your thoughts. You are choosing to observe. You're not allowing thoughts, disturbing thoughts, to choose you. And because of that, then there are no mental proliferation. The mind doesn't run around. The mind calms down. And then it stills the emotion. Because of the calming of the mind, now this thing called emotion will become still. It will not try to fight you anymore. So choosing your thoughts is so important. And this introspective attention is very important to help you choose your thoughts, not allow thoughts to choose you. The first part, when you relax your body, what are you doing? You are actually breaking this biochemical reaction that's going on, stopping more hormonal releases. The second part, when you calm your mind in this manner, what are you doing? You're avoiding mental proliferation as a result of sensory perceptions, memory, imagination, expectation. Sensory perceptions is basically when you pay attention to things going on around you. So when you pay attention to everything that's going on around you, the noise, the sound, the light, the activity, the people, the shouting, the speaking, the words, when you pay attention to that, it actually causes more disturbance to the mind. And then the other part, if you're not paying attention to those things, there is another part of the mind that could disturb you. Your memory, your imagination, your expectation, the internal part, the inner part, the part of the unwholesome part that is already there. They will arise. So there are really two things coming to disturb you. The external influence that has not yet arisen yet, and the internal part that is already arisen. So when we stop this attention to the environment, this is one of the exercises called samvara, elimination of these external influences. And when we do not pay attention to memory, imagination, expectation, and emotional thoughts, that is called pahana. These two are part of the 4 great endeavors or 4 great strivings in your meditation practice. If we look at this sublime eightfold way that the Buddha has taught us, of course, the first part of right view, right intention talks about the initial part of panya, being aware of what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, understanding the Buddha Dharma. And then the second part is dealing with sila, right? Right speech, right action, right livelihood. And it is this third part that deals with meditation. The third part is called samadhi, which I call tranquility or mental equilibrium. That is right effort, sama vayama, right mindfulness, sama sati, and right what is called right concentration, sama samadhi. But my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, he calls this harmonious equilibrium. Sama samadhi is harmonious equilibrium. So in this process of right effort, that is knowing what are the techniques you should exercise in order to meditate properly. Right? In this sama vayama, there are 4 important aspects. First is to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome states. This is samvara. Next is pahana, which is to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. And then the third is bhavana, and that is to cultivate wholesome states that have not yet arisen. And finally, anurakkhana, and that is to maintain and perfect wholesome states that have already arisen. So these are the important exercises when we learn to meditate. So I won't go any further. I think it's enough at this point for you to understand what is happening with your emotions. That firstly, emotional arousal triggers biochemical reactions in the body, causing physiological disturbance, dukkha, physical pain. And then with that, it disturbs the mind and begins to cause mental pain, mental suffering, domanassa. And the way to overcome and tame these is to learn to relax and to allow emotions to go away. Let them leave peacefully. May you live in peace. Don't fight it. It's like this great big fighter who steps into the fighting ring. If there is nobody go up to fight him, sooner or later he's going to leave. It's very boring and lonely up there. So he will leave and find somebody else. So the same thing. When emotions come to visit you, choose your thoughts. Choose relaxation. Choose calmness. Choose peace. And then emotions will go away. You can't fight it. Because you have no chance of winning when you try to fight emotions. So, with that, I conclude my presentation.